Good evening. I would like to start the meeting tonight with our election of officers. And we'll begin that process with a call for nominations for the chair of the Board of Education. Yeah.
I'd like to nominate Katrina to be chair of the board. If she'd do it again for us. Obviously, it's been an interesting time, an unfortunate one considering the circumstances, but Katrina has at least proven to me and the rest of us in the town that she not only cares about the town, cares about the school system. She's got the experience to lead, and I think that in whatever transition we experience over the course of the rest of the year, I think it'd be helpful and important to have some continuity in that level of experience.
Thank you. Is there a second? Bill?
Seconded.
Okay. Any other nominations? Okay, nominations are closed. All in favor? Okay, it's unanimous. Thank you. In which case, I will now call then for nominations for Vice Chair of the Board of Education. Sure.
I'd like to nominate Phil Hogan for Vice Chair. Phil is a member of the Communications Committee, and he is has been a member of and served faithfully as two of our larger hiring committees for the district in partnership with the administration. He attended the budget meeting and followed the process closely throughout all the meetings we had with the town bodies. He was there faithfully, many late night meetings. And I think he's taken a thoughtful approach to questions and ideas to bring forward to the board and to the administration. And I think he works well with all of the board members. So nominate Phil.
Is there a second? You go.
I second.
Second. Second and third. Okay. Any other nominations? Okay. Nominations are closed. All in favor? Unanimous. Thank you. Thank you both for your willingness to serve, and congratulations. We'll take a brief 5-second break. Take your nameplate with you, and we'll move, and we'll continue. Hello again. All right. Welcome. Thank you. And Trina, it is your meeting to call to order.
Thank you. I'd like to now call to order the regular meeting of May 8th regular meeting of the New Canaan Board of Education. With that, we'll say the Pledge of Allegiance. Now with our agenda, I'll ask for motion to approve the agenda for tonight. Brendan, second. Bob, all in favor? Unanimous, thank you. And the approval of minutes for April 24th, our last meeting. Is there a motion? Bill, second. Brendan, all in favor? Abstention, Bob, thank you. Comments from the public? To ensure the public's right to be heard, the board has set aside time during the meeting for public comments. 2 minutes will be allotted to each speaker and a maximum of 15 minutes to each subject. Is there anyone wishing to address the board? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. Thank you. To reports and recognition. Our first presentation this evening is an update on our enrollment projections, and I'll turn it to Dr. Lutzy to make introductions.
Great. As Mike walks to the podium, I will share Mike Zuber from the SLAM Collaborative. Mike has been working with his group to put together enrollment projections for schools throughout the region, the state, for quite some time. Recently, they became affiliated with SLAM Collaborative, who you may know as a primarily architectural firm here in Connecticut. doing work in schools, municipal areas, and private as well. Then the impetus to contract with Mike through SLAM were the enrollment projections that we received back in November from NASDAQ. As you'll recall, we had that bump that we were looking at in 2026, 27. So Mike and his team took a deep dive and did a thorough analysis for us, and he's here to share it with us tonight. So Mike, with that, I will turn it over to you if you're ready. And
Yeah, I just had to pop in my thumb drive. I noticed I changed one bullet from the version I sent you, so I'll just get this up and loaded, and we'll be ready to go.
fantastic, thank you. And welcome to New Canaan.
Thank you. All right, so it's loading up now.
Is that loading on our laptop?
Yep,
Might take a while.
there we go. Nope, it's a Monday,
right.
but it's moving along. Oh. There we go. All right, good evening, everybody. So hopefully everybody had a chance to at least thumb through it all, go through our enrollment projection report, but if there's any questions, I'm happy to pause and be able to answer those along the way. We try to pack a lot of information into it, but also try to distill it down and really kind of present the most salient points and sort of the key areas that we're seeing part of our demographic work. As Brian mentioned, I've been doing enrollment projections and school facility planning in Connecticut for over 20 years. A bulk of the work that I do is down in Fairfield County as well as in many of the urban districts. I've started this process, and it really becomes a process of how we kind of get into enrollment projections. Ours is a little bit different than some of the other firms, and with that, I'll kind of pause and explain some of the nuances to it as well. But typically, as part of a 10-year projection, where we always begin is really looking at enrollment drivers. That gets us through our demographics, our births, our housing, our student enrollment trends, which then begin sort of building that baseline. We rely a lot on the cohort survival model, but we also break from it and make modifications to it, because typically that model itself is really saying exactly what happened in the past as a predictor of what's going to happen in the future, and we know that that's not always true, especially when you're looking at doing any kind of modeling over a 5 or even 10-year period. So with that, I'll kind of jump right into it, and I'll get started on our demographic overview. So what we're showing here in the bar chart is the census data that was fielded in April of 2020. Not the best time for fielding a 10-year census. The federal government only does this major fielding of all residents once every 10 years. It doesn't capture all of the movement that occurred during the pandemic, and then kind of, as it began waning over the last few years. I believe by the end of the month they will have new estimates out, but nonetheless, the total population data is the best that we have. What it's showing us for New Canaan over the last 10 years, growth of almost 900 residents, or 4.5%, just getting over 20,600 residents. Digging in a little bit deeper into that, as part of the 10-year census, we're able to get population broken down by 5-year cohorts. So with that, we always begin looking at those different cohort levels. One of the main areas we look at is females of childbearing age. That informs the birth projection modeling that we do. But when we began looking at the different changes, it was jumped out to me seeing that the median age in New Canaan only increased by 1 year over the last decade. Doing work throughout Connecticut, it's one of the lower changes that I've seen. We're always seeing in the news Connecticut's aging, everything that's happening with the baby boomers, as well as a smaller generation of Gen Xers until we get more millennials into our communities. We're seeing more rapid aging than that. So that was one of the things that really jumped out to me when I began doing this work, as well as looking at females of childbearing age, a rather steep decline from 2000 to 2010 of about 22%. From 2010 to 2020, there was an increase that offset that of about 23%. What we use that level of information for is to inform our birth projections. So first I'll begin talking about that black line, which is the historic births. And I think, as Brian mentioned, one of the things that sparked this study was that big bubble that we're seeing there with that big birth cohort in 2021. That birth cohort is still preliminary. So what that means is the state goes through this auditing process. That has most of the births, I believe, but not 100% of those out-of-state resident births reported back into that. So it takes about 18 months using the DPH data until they get all of the New York births reported back into the system. So the births for 2022 came in less than that at 160, and I did make an adjustment there based on a historic factor of non-resident births. So what that is a mother from New Canaan, that's the mother's resident address, has a birth in a New York hospital. Somehow, some way, it takes 18 months to get the data into the system. I don't understand how it works. The state works at a different rate than the rest of us, but it is nonetheless, that's the most recent number. But what we did going forward was ran 3 different projection models as we're showing, and we follow a similar color scheme throughout, with the blue always being the high, the green always being the medium model, and the red always being the low model. So based on the actual demographic data for females of childbearing age, we used the 2019 fertility rates, and we're projecting that the low model will average about 155 births over the next 5 years, the medium 165, and then the high model 174. The reason we went through that modeling is we've been watching a lot of data, especially pre-pandemic to that 2021 year to the 2022 year. And what we're seeing in a lot of communities is that there's a really big spike in 2021 that was followed by a drop-off to near the pre-pandemic level in 2022. So New Canaan here is pretty consistent with what we've been tracking across the state. Looking at the housing market, as with many communities throughout the region, we've seen a housing boom in 2020 and 2021. That boom in New Canaan was very similar to the prior boom of the early 2000s before the Great Recession hit in the 2008-2009 timeframe. But what we're also seeing in 2022 is that with the full year of data in through that, that the total sales have dropped back off to that period of about 4 years leading up to the pandemic. So kind of what your recent historic average would be is how we look at it, with that considerable slowdown in the total number of sales, just really getting limited by the overall supply. It's just not out there in many of the Connecticut communities right now. And this is just tracking that median single-family sale price is at a peak of just nearly $1.8 million, surpassing the peak prior to the Great Recession overall. And then the median sale price for condos is just over $1 million, up from $700K just prior to the onset of the pandemic. Through the data that we get from the MLS service, we're able to get address-specific housing sales. So what that allows us to do, especially in a community like New Canaan, which the elementary schools zone based on geography, we're able to then put together this hotspot map, which really looks at the clustering of where those sales have occurred over the last full year of data that we're looking at. And for this, we use Q4 of 21 through Q4 of 2022. And what we're seeing here is that it's really kind of an effect of where the different housing stock is, as well as some of the lot sizes, but we're seeing a lot of clustering within New Canaan's town center. This is also picking up on the condo sales, and then on some of the subdivisions, we're starting to see that lighter yellow area where we could see a number of sale clustering in those subdivisions. But overall, really right in sort of the core of your community is where you had many of those sales. We then did an analysis based on your elementary catchment zones. East Elementary School had about 30% of those home sales. South had close to 40, and West had 32. So pretty well distributed. One wasn't pushing so far into one direction. But we really used this information to begin looking at how the housing market is impacting the various areas. So when we do the neighborhood or the individual elementary school projections, we're looking at the different ratios and modeling there with the lens of what's happening in the housing market. Looking at the total housing permits, and this is data that gets reported from the town up through the Department of Economic and Community Development at the state. So total permits overall averaged about 40 over the last decade. However, there were a lot of demolitions in there. When you begin to net that out, there's a total net of about 5 units annually. Where we see some of the big spikes is where some of those larger scale multifamily developments permits are starting to get caught up in the system. So in 2020, where we have that larger kind of darker mustard color spike, that's attributed to the View, the View project. In talking with the town's planning department, and this is current as of the end of January, we want to get a handle on any of the sort of, we call it the housing pipeline. So things that are under construction, recently approved, or in that kind of proposed pending category. We want to know what type of development, where it is, which elementary school it may impact, to be able to then begin to look at the student generation that could come out of these developments, as well as being able to add those student multipliers into our enrollment projections. So looking at the Lakeview Ave Building 2, that's under construction, that has 40 units total. Husted Ave is also under construction, 12 units there. There's a redevelopment on Burtis Ave that's been approved but not yet under construction, 25 total units. And the developments that are in the news that, you know, every time there's a commission meeting, you kind of see a little pivoting there, so the numbers are changing a little bit, but we're still carrying those. Both of those on Weed Street as well as Hill Street we're calling in the proposed pending category. Nothing yet has been approved to the best of my knowledge, and the total units may not reflect the most recent meeting that they had with the commission, because they're keep going back and revising the site plans based on comments, which is pretty typical for that kind of process. So we just map those out, looking at the geographic distribution, tying those to the different elementary schools. And then we begin getting an understanding of the potential students generated from those developments. There's various multipliers out there. Sometimes, you know, prior to the release of some new information, or if you don't have the level of information that we were able to get for New Canaan, you would rely on regional or statewide multipliers. What we did here was we have the student's address matched. We know where the developments are. We know the types of developments already in town. So we took a little bit of a different approach, like we do in many of our communities in Connecticut, where we began just comping developments to develop localized multipliers. And then we test those against what industry has is the ESI multipliers, which then kind of ground truths it a little bit. But what this does is this provides localized student generation, whereas what we see, if you use Rutgers multipliers, they overshoot a lot of the development just because they base it solely on bedrooms, and they really don't understand the different markets of the communities that the developments are occurring. So on the right, we're showing the historic enrollment for Avalon, New Canaan. What jumped out to me was that prior to the pandemic, there was more New Canaan public school students coming out of that development versus, say, in 21-22 as well as 22-23. But nonetheless, we used a 5-year average for that multiplier in order to generate students coming out of the Weed Street as well as the Hill Street development. For Lakeside Ave Building 2, we used the New Canaan Housing Authority, the Mill Pond Apartments. There are the multipliers for that one. And then for Husted and Burtis redevelopment, we excluded those out of there and used, really, it was the crossing for New Canaan as well as several other smaller developments there to generate our students for that. What it looks like overall is if all these developments come through fruition in our 10-year horizon, we would have about 111 school-age children in New Canaan Public Schools, with the greatest in Weed Street at 46, Hill Street at 43, Lakeview 15, and Burtis and Husted at 4 and 3 respectively. And we disaggregated those based on your grade level groupings of your buildings in order to be able then to feed them into our enrollment projections, not only district-wide, but also at the individual elementary school level. All right, getting right into your enrollment overall, and this is where I made one of the changes. I realized I had the wrong number in bullet 2, so Brian, I'll send the latest copy to get back out to the board there. But what we do is we do an analysis of new to district students. Basically, when we request a large amount of information, and I know it's always, do you need all this stuff, is what we get asked. Brian didn't ask me that, but a lot of clients will ask, do you need this? Yeah, because we really want to do a deep dive on everything. So thanks to everybody who got us all this information. So looking at student enrollment extracts, we track students by their PSIS identification number, so like their SASSA state ID, to see whether or not they were in the school system at any point prior to that, and we're able to then truly identify new to district students. Why this is helpful is we want to get a understanding of not only numerically what happened during a big turnover or a big change such like was the onset of the pandemic, but we want to be able to look deeply at our modeling and see what it's picking up on based on how many new students and how many net change of students. So what we saw here was that historically you were pretty stable leading up to the pandemic, and then your peak really occurred in 21-22, where you saw almost 300 new to district students, but in 22-23, that number dropped off even a bit lower than that 2019-20 level overall. There were 100 new to district students in the elementary grades this past year. That was similar to the pre-pandemic levels. We looked at them by all the grade groupings and all the individual grades, how we track them. We don't do anything with kindergarten because we assume every kindergarten student other than the ones that attended pre-K are new to district. At Sachs Middle School, that number dropped off pretty significantly from 2021 to 2022-23 by about 30 new to district students there. It had a little build up before that. And then at the high school, it was pretty similar throughout the last 3 years. 2019-20 was a much greater number of new to district students. This is that deeper look at the elementary grades with that peak in 21-22 of 130 and the drop back to the recent historic level. We also looked at that as a function of the different elementary schools. So we did a 4-year average for that, and East Elementary School had about 37% of your new to district students, South 34%, and then West 29%. What this doesn't capture is the outs. So that's only the ins of students. So when we do our net migration analysis, this really allows us to capture both the in and out. So comparing the grade groupings from one year to the next mathematically, those group grade cohorts, we're able to get a good understanding of what's happening with the total student body as it transitions from one year to the next. What jumped out to me was that you have very stable elementary enrollment, especially over the last several years. That in that bar chart on the left, the third bar represents the first year of the pandemic where it dropped down some, but immediately got back right on where it was pre-pandemic. We've noticed a lot of variability at the middle school level. Going back a number of years, you had a little bit more out migration. Then it kind of alternated a little bit, but over 3 of the last 4 years, the middle school has experienced net immigration, so you're gaining students from year to year there. And then at the high school, it was very, very variable, where some years you had out migration, some years you've had immigration, and of the last 2 years, you've had a net out migration of students, albeit this past year was a lot lower than it was in 21-22. We just did that same exercise and looking at the individual elementary schools. Over the last 5 years, East Elementary averaged a net immigration of 8 students. There was some out-migration there in 21-22. South Elementary averaged 20 net new students over that same period of time annually per year. And West was just behind at 18. And then we looked at the average kindergarten class size across each of the elementary schools, with East School having the largest average elementary kindergarten classes over the last 5 years. Looking at your historic enrollment trend, it's remarkable. I've worked in many different communities all over the state and all over New England and even down into the Southeast and Mid-Atlantic, and rarely do I look back this number of years and I see enrollment that's so flat. So there's really not much to talk about trend-wise on this slide. You know your enrollment well. At all of the grade levels, it's remarkably stable over this period of time, and even throughout the last 5 to 10 years, it's been remarkably stable. Looking at the individual elementary schools, we always have a little bit of fluctuations, even though K-4 enrollment has been pretty stable. You do have some different trends that we're tracking throughout. We have seen some decline at West Elementary School leading up to, I think it was through 2021, and then over the last 2 years, enrollment had grown a little bit there. Looking at East and South School, both of those were in kind of lockstep for a majority of the last 10 years, and just recently we saw where East became the larger school after just having a little bit of a dip down in enrollment there in 21, 22. But those two enrollments really are kind of mirroring each other over the last few years, even though South School had a little bit of a dip down there in the last year, but really nothing of note. And then looking at the middle and high school, once again, really stable enrollment overall there at both grade level groupings in both buildings. We pulled the data through the State Department of Ed to look at the overall change in diversity in the communities that we work in. Going back, this goes back to 2007, 2008. I do know back in 2000, and I think it was 2010, they did just a little different classification of how they look at race and ethnicity, and that caused a little bit of an uptick across the board. But overall, New Canaan Public Schools is becoming more diverse throughout the better part of the last decade. Many of our communities that we work in, your neighbors down in this area are experiencing a very similar trend in diversity overall. And the recent data point, and I did not see the most recent one for 22-23 yet published by the state, but it probably, my guess would probably be around that 19 or 20%. I don't know if you've seen the report from the state. If they're a little bit behind there. But overall, that's where that shakes out. Looking at the enrollment projections, I'll just touch on our methodology a little bit more. We use the cohort survival as our base, but we also make modifications to it where we see where there's a disconnect between the recent historic average. So where we make those modifications are things that we talk about in the housing development, housing pipeline, where we have developments coming online that we know about that are not getting picked up in the model is where we begin to add students. We add those external students into there, as well as where we look at birth to K and we get a good understanding of that relationship versus what we are anticipating for your kindergarten class. But really, as we get through these, the persistency ratios capture everything that I talked about in those enrollment drivers, as well as your enrollment trends in the district itself. So we're assuming over the next 10 years, pre-K will average 65 students annually. We're assuming that the housing generation, so those developments that I was just discussing, are all going to come to fruition at some point in time and add students into the system. We do use a blended model of our birth to K, which includes both the traditional static, which you may hear from and see in other demographic reports, where it may be, well, we used a 5-year average birth to K, or we used a 3-year average. We do more of a variable birth to K, where we develop a relationship between births and kindergartens and housing. What we've been seeing typically over the last 12 or 13 years is that when births are way up, the birth to K drops down. And when we have elevated housing conditions, we're seeing students moving in or families moving in with children in that age group of 0 to 4, 0 to 5 years old, not yet in the system, but a big change from, say, 15 years ago, where we had families would move in and then you would be tracking many more births because they would be having births in the community that they intended to send their students to school. So our high projection model assumes those high births, no surprise there. Student immigration will average plus 1.6%, so a positive migration of students, which really is in line with the last 3 years. So those elevated housing conditions over the last 3 years. Our median model assumes the median births as well as student migration of positive 1.3%. This is in line with your last 5-year average, which was 1.4%. So really a good blend of your recent history. And then the low model assumes that migration will be below that, which is really not seen in New Canaan. So it's really sort of a pessimistic model. It hasn't been seen in New Canaan in any part of the history that I looked at when I looked at about 15 years of data there. All right, so these are the persistency ratios. I think the key takeaway is looking at the variability year to year in your birth to K. That's something that makes using a static or traditional birth to K very challenging. But what we're kind of picking up on is that we've seen in many communities, as well as looking at your data, is that using a more variable method will give better results overall. And then really, as we talked about that modeling, you could note that your estimates of migration, which are your immigration over the last 3 years, have been really elevated for where they've been in the recent history leading up to that. And this is just a graphical look of that birth decay. So I mentioned earlier, going back 15 years ago, you had births that were higher. You also had birth decay that were lower. So that's just showing that the sort of the family trend was to move into somewhere, have children there, and then move them into the school. The more recent trend that we're seeing is that larger birth decay, where back in the early 2000s, it was 1.5. Now from 2014-15 on, it's 1.9. So we're picking up on that trend of immigration being a much larger driver for kindergarten than just static births themselves. This is really our 3 different models. So we're leading up to our projections with the black line showing our historic enrollment. Then we have, as Brian, I think you called it, the hurricane modeling looking forward. I stole that term, by the way, now, so I'm going to use that for a while. But really kind of looking at those different enrollment drivers. So with any projections, to do 10-year projections, you have to make some assumptions. So this relies on those birth modeling that we did. They're not actual births, but they're model birth, as well as the immigration assumptions that I talked about. So that blue line shows the high model, the green line shows the medium, and the red shows the low. Within the first 5 years, they're all pretty well correlated. So we have a smaller band there, a little greater certainty, and then as you get a little bit further out, you become more assumption driven. But that's where we still see that medium model that we're showing in green really being the best driver. That the immigration in that really reflected kind of your historic average really well. That blue model assumes that the peak of the housing will likely continue for a bulk of the next decade, as we're seeing now, especially as I pulled the early numbers of the 23 market. The housing market, which is a big driver, is still lagging where it's been. I think it's going to continue to lag for a while. So that model seems a bit unlikely. And then the low model assumes that there's just going to be stagnant immigration and stagnant growth overall. But overall, we're showing that the green model, we're going to have growth out to just over 4,300 students in 10 years, just over 4,200 students in 5 years. And what that looks like at the individual cohort level is shown here in the stacked bar chart. Keeping in mind that that stacked bar chart does include a very small sliver of red, which is the pre-K enrollment overall. And then in blue, we're showing the elementary projections for all 3 schools. In green, we're showing the middle school projections, and then in yellow, we're showing the high school. So really, the elementary school enrollment, the K4, is expected to grow by about 100 students, or 6.5%. Over the and the middle school enrollment over the next 5 years is projected to average 1,280 students, and then grow up to just over 1,330 students. And high school enrollment is projected to average just under 1,300 students over the decade, with the peak enrollment of 1,314 students. Looking at the individual elementary school, this is where we added those, based on the developments, we added those external students generated into these models as well. But those were really kind of fully built out over really kind of like 4 years to 10 years in our enrollment projection horizon. So where you start to see that uptick around that 5-year mark is where we're starting to see some of those kind of begin to hit in there. But overall, East Elementary School is projected to grow by about 3.5% over the first 5 years, getting up to 570 students. South School, 544, so growth of 6.7%. And West School getting up to 456 students, growth there of about 5% overall. And then the growth drops off a little bit in that second 5 years, with an average growth of about 1.5% across the schools themselves. And then I'll just leave this up there while we have any questions. This is just really kind of a summary of the main key points that I talked about, and I'm happy to take any questions from the board.
Thank you. Comprehensive presentation. I appreciate it. Questions? Brendan?
Yes, so this is a great presentation. First of all, super comprehensive, so appreciate it. I thought I heard you say that you didn't use in the modeling, I'm looking at the district-wide projections, you didn't use actual births. So if I'm looking at like 3 or 4 years out, you're not necessarily using the births from the last 2 to 3 years.
I am.
You are, okay.
Yep.
I got it.
What I said was that the last 2 years are still, they're still preliminary in the state.
Got it.
So they're only the births that are recorded within the state of Connecticut. They're not 100%. 21 is probably 98%, and 22 is probably 94%. The state just lags in getting the New York State births and the hospitals they're put into the system.
I got it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then this is probably a question more for Brian, which is, I was looking at the appendix here of the district-wide projections on the high end, which is, K through 4. I think we get up to, 1630 or so, 1,635 in 28, 29 compared to 1,493, this year. Do we have space for that increase in our elementary schools, or is it sort of
Well,
topping out at that level?
yeah, I think that fortunately it doesn't happen overnight, right? So if we did see that the high projections were the ones that were coming to, materializing for a couple of years, then we would have to do some things. We wouldn't have this. Yeah. We are looking now, Jill has been over at East and spending some time with Chris and the team over there to create a little bit more space there for another classroom in anticipation of the need for that for next year. But beyond that, these projections and the ones we've looked at, we should be in good shape otherwise.
Yeah, I was looking at the high end, so hopefully we're not.
Yeah, if it materializes next year, we'll either have to mobilize then or really keep a very close eye on it for the year after. So we'll just have to see where it goes. But if we stay with the middle range there, depending upon grade distribution and things, but we anticipate being okay.
Thank you.
Penny?
So, finding the extra classroom at East, I'm going to guess that would be involving taking the science classroom, turning it into a regular class, and teaching science.
It's actually splitting a space in half.
What?
It's splitting an existing space in half. It's a
Okay.
very large classroom that's there, and looking to split it in half. So we're in the specials area.
So I don't know if you saw our other projections. Did you share those? Never have a discussion about that?
I looked at
Oh,
them.
yeah.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Okay, so Erica actually seems to have bought her notebook or somebody from our projections in the fall. So I don't have it with me. I couldn't find it online. They were projecting like a real bump.
Yeah.
Yes.
Elementary. And I was wondering if you could sort of give us your short version on why you thought that was accurate.
Yeah, I'll be happy to.
Not the best projection.
Yeah, so when I looked at the other projections, what they did was where you have that, and this is actually good slides, the high projection to show, where they had that large birth cohort for 2021 of 198. They used a very high birth decay, assuming that the birth decay would be a high birth decay in that year. And what we know is that birth decay is very variable here, and it's been very variable throughout many of the Fairfield County communities over the last 8 or 9 years. We've developed more of a mathematical model. It's a regression analysis that we look at that creates a variable birth decay. So rather than saying 198 students times a birth decay of 2.2 or 2.1 is going to give you 400 plus kindergartners, what we've seen historically, and even looking back at your data when you had those higher birth years, your birth decay was always lower. So what it does is it's really just a mathematical function of when you have a lower number of births, your birth decay is higher because immigration plays a larger factor in it. Whereas if you have a very high number of births, you wouldn't count that same immigration factor at the same level because of the way the model is set up. So we've had good results with the way we've modeled it. I don't see it very likely yielding a kindergarten class of 400 and some students, which has never happened here before. And that's why we've modeled it the way we've modeled it.
I have a question just because it's additive to what Penny just said. So I'm looking at the elementary school projections medium model where you have South School has a huge bump up in 2026, 27, from 513 to 537. That's, I mean, probably pretty high, because I'm looking at, you know, the birth rates, and I hear what you just said, but there's that huge bump in 2021, so you'd assume that that would be the year we'd see that bump in at least one or more of our elementary schools. So maybe the questions for you are for the district, but are we concerned about that year? Just said, seems like disproportionately higher than other years in terms of the elementary school increase.
Well, that is the year
That's,
that the children born in
Yeah,
21 would be
right.
coming into school, right? So we have to plan for it. We have to make sure that we have the right number of classrooms and that we're appropriately staffed. There will be budget implications when we think about staffing and staffing up for, even if it doesn't get to 400, it's still the largest kindergarten class that we've seen in some time that I'm aware of. So
yeah,
there will be some other implications. with
Yeah.
that.
and we also assume in our model that, so when you look at 198 births, that larger number that some other consultants may put out, assume that all of them are going to show up as 5-year-old kindergartners. So we take some of that 198 births and we realize there's going to be a percentage of those that show up at 5, show up at 6, right? So where we have that, not that huge spike, you'll see where it comes up and it also persists for the next year, realizing that very large birth cohort is going to have some impact across 2 different kindergarten years rather than showing up all at once. But
Makes
it
sense.
could definitely lead to, and the biggest concern I see typically when you have a big birth cohort and you have a big kindergarten coming, it's just the geographic distribution of them. We use a historic percentage, but without knowing exactly where each of those births are, they could be at a little bit more in one elementary school versus the other. So for your space planning, that's going to be really kind of the key thing that I would focus on.
Other question? Penny?
I haven't gone down, looked between all the elementary schools typically, but with some of the new projects that might come online and where you have slotted them into the districts that they're in currently, do you think we're going to need to make any changes in our allocations between schools?
That would really come down to space, I think, based on how much space you have or how much space you can gain, for lack of a better term, over time.
You're saying this is known future development, so how did you include the proposed but not approved?
So I included those.
Okay.
In my experience, and I'll just go back to the map that has them on there just to have something to talk to. All right, here they are right there. So it's my understanding that they're kind of proposed pending, but there's discussion on going an 8-30G route. I've seen that many times in many different communities, and it's just the timing of it. If the developer intends to push the project through, it's going to be delayed, but it will go through in some shape or form, but it may not look like the exact numbers that they're proposing now. So we held to the most recent information that we had, and we kept them in there. If for some reason that development doesn't come to fruition, you would basically take out 46 and 43 students over that 10-year projection horizon from west and east, respectively. If for some reason there was the developments didn't happen. But I felt the need to include them in there, especially for a 10-year projection.
That's helpful, thanks.
I'm sorry, did you include there was another application for downtown, right next to Town Hall. It wasn't that many units. I was just wondering whether or not you included that one in your analysis. It includes the old Red Cross building.
I don't believe it. Was that less?
Next to Vine Cottage. It's a much smaller.
Was that like 3 or 4 units? I remember looking at one that was very small. It was less than 5 units, I believe. And they were actually small in size.
Okay.
I believe they were studios and 1-bedrooms. So what I try to do with it is if they're not large developments or I don't think they're going to generate a lot of students, they typically get captured in the baseline projections because development always happens. I look for developments that I think are notable that haven't typically occurred in the last really 5 or 6 years that aren't already captured in the model. So the model has a, general assumptions built into of how many new developments, how much housing sales. When we see things like, especially Weed Street and Hill Street, those are ones to us that jump out. Like these are of scale and should be added in, that we're not picking up based on the
Right.
historic cohort survival ratio, for lack of a better term.
It's incredibly helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
What are the capacity? It just seems west is really light. Where's that in comparison to capacity?
So the thing with West that's not included here is the preschool.
Right,
So we've got another 65 kids for the preschool
got it,
that are in there. So it sort of balances things out as far as capacity goes.
got it.
Just one clarification on that one. So east, for all intents and purposes, is bursting at the seams. I mean, east is full now.
It's our largest elementary school.
So south, we get up to a high of 548 in the 30-31 year. So that 540, can we accommodate that now, or do we need to start thinking about the same sorts of things we're thinking about?
So we're always thinking about it. It's also about, it's not just the pure number, it's also the distribution.
Right.
Right. So I mean, if you're running, it's the number of sections. So one feeds into the other, but really you have to go that level deeper to see grade by grade. And a couple of kids here or there can make the difference between needing to open a new classroom section. And that's why, the projections are incredibly helpful, but you don't want to go too far down the road of acting until you're closer to this. That's why we're looking at enrollment already for next year. We're looking at the specific, we have the projections, but we're actually looking at the actual students grade by grade. And it's a good time to plug the data verification process. So we just started our data verification process, which will help us to really zero in and nail down. And it helps us with our out migration as well. If people are leaving the district, they tell us, and we're able to clean up those data quite a bit. So in the next month or so, we'll really start to zero in on number of sections per grade per school.
Just to clarify, would you agree with our other projections that basically when we look at these, we can have a fair degree of certainty for the first 5 years because they're based on actual birth. We have to do the multiple check, but got that. And then when you get for years 6 through 6 forward, there's much greater swing.
Yeah, that's typically what happens. So I've been benchmarking projections for a long time, and we typically average about between a half and really 0.8% deviation from the actual per year. So when you look at those first 5 years, you should be right around 2.5% from the actuals. And then after that, if you have a big birth year that you didn't model, that you were unaware of, or something changes in the housing conditions, something major event that's unexpected, that's where years 6 through 10 at the elementary level become a little bit less reliable. The middle school, they're still pretty good. The high school, they're very good. But really at that elementary level, it's so dependent on those K cohorts. That's what really that leading edge of feeding everything into it. So you have to have really good assumptions or nail your assumptions there to get really accurate years 6 to 10. But I would say make your facility decisions on fresh projections in that first 5 years is what we always kind of recommend.
Great. Mike, thank you for being with us tonight. Really appreciate it. Thank
Have
you.
a good evening. Thanks for having me.
All right, next on our agenda is the Tri-State Report and Presentation, and Dr. Crenti and Dr. Bliss will be walking us through that update.
Good evening. So we're going to change our focus over to well-being. First of all, Susan and I are delighted to be here this evening to go through the Tri-State report, which we recently received. So as you recall, just some quick reminders. Our essential question was, to what extent is our intentional commitment to well-being embedded in our school communities and practices? And as part of our essential question, we defined what we meant by well-being, what we meant by embedded practices, and what we meant by school community. As also part of our tri-state visit, we have to select a tri-state indicator. So in addition to our essential question, there are 8 different indicators that Tri-State has. We chose to focus in on indicator number 5, which is the professional learning, supervision, and evaluation. And below that is the definition created by Tri-State. So when Tri-State comes to do their review of our essential question, those are the areas that they would also be looking for when they're also looking at the indicator on professional learning, supervision, and evaluation. So we've spent time talking to all of you at some point about why we chose to focus on a systematic approach to well-being. And we chose this topic for a variety of reasons. But really, the ultimate goal was to really gather feedback from an outside group of people to come in and to really give us feedback on how we're progressing on our approach and our work to well-being. I also think it's great when you have an outside group coming in to take a close look at the Board of Education goal. And this has been a Board of Education goal for many years. The objectives underneath that goal continually change, but certainly our school climate, our ruler, our approach to SAPL, our professional learning opportunities has been part of this board initiative for many years. So it's nice when you have an outside group that can come in and do a close dive and a close look, not only at our essential question, not only at the indicator, but also taking a close look at our Board of Education goal as well. So you may recall, I think it was the night before Tri-State began, I was sitting here at a board meeting and we shared with you that we had 17 people that came on March 8th and they began to live in our Wagner room here at the high school. And these 17 people we had a superintendent, several principals, assistant principals, a special education director, teachers, a DEI leader, social worker, and directors from Tri-State. And as you can see, they came from Connecticut, New York, and New Jersey. And so the towns in which they came from in those states really varied, with some of them as close up to Syracuse, New York. On the morning of March 8th, we welcomed the committee here in the Wagner room. And there were many people that were part of the district steering committee that were here to greet them. And as part of our presentation, we actually began with a broadcast from our students. And I know that you have probably already seen this broadcast, but I think it's worth showing again because certainly it's always nice to hear from our students. And it's really important for all of you to highlight all the experiences they're having in our schools. And I think you'll see that it was a way to help our visiting committee kind of relax and enjoy their visit here in New Canaan Public Schools. So I'm going to quickly play this for you.
We are 4th graders from South School, and we would like to welcome you to the New Canaan Public School. Understand that you're going to learn more about how we support well-being in our schools, and we are so excited that you are here. We have learned a lot about well-being and emotional intelligence over the past few years, and we thought it would be helpful to you if we share a few tips for your visit. The first important thing is to know and understand what you are feeling, because then you can use a strategy to feel better. In New Canaan, we use New Meter to help us understand and talk about our feelings. You have to name it to tame it.
Yes, like you might feel stressed to be away from your job for a few days. It can be hard to juggle being here and at the same time having everyone texting, emailing you, and calling you from your school. You might even feel in the red.
One thing that helps me when I start to feel people are asking me to do too many things at once is positive self-talk.
This just means you say nice things to yourself.
You could tell yourself something like, they're going to be okay without me, or I don't have to solve this, or it is okay if I take some time away from work. Someone else will cover it for me.
This will help you to worry less.
Another thing that will be hard for you all this week is looking through all of that tri-state evidence our teachers have been working so hard on. I know I really don't like having a lot of homework. When I feel overwhelmed by too much work, I start to feel discouraged and don't want to do any of it.
When that happens to me, I use a meta moment. First, I notice how I'm feeling. I pause and take a deep breath, and then I think of my best self. For example, your best self is meant to be helpful. Remembering we want to help us do better work here will keep you going. You can then pick a strategy. It might be to take a break every 50 minutes so you can stretch and breathe and get back to your important work.
Hey, I'm over here. We know it can also be hard with a lot of people you don't know well. I felt this way in the beginning of the year when I started my classwork. I didn't have many friends. It felt kind of scary.
But what we do in our classes in New Canaan at the beginning of the year is to write a charter together about how we want to feel and what we will do to feel that way. It helps us to feel safer and to do our best work together. Maybe you could try a charter. How do you want to feel this week? What can you all do to help each other feel that way?
Another hard thing you have to do this week is to talk to a lot of people you don't know, and then try to agree on things, like when you give our teachers a report card at the end of the week. Sometimes it can be hard to agree when people have different ways of looking at things. I know I get frustrated sometimes playing Foursquare with my friends, and we disagree about who is out. If this happens to you, you can try to use the blueprint. The blueprint helps us see someone else's point of view. We think about how we feel and why we feel that way, then we think about how they feel and why they feel that way. When we think of their way of seeing things, it helps us calm down and solve problems together, being our best selves.
We hope this broadcast will help you to take care of your well-being over the next 3 days. We want you to feel connected, supported, valued, energized, and productive while you are here.
Thank you for coming to our school, and we hope you have a wonderful visit. Remember,
You have to name it to tame it.
So I probably could just drop the mic right there. I don't think I need to say anything else. We've done our visit. But as you all know, thank you, many of you participated, I think all of you participated in the interviews with the Tri-State Committee. In addition to interviewing the Board of Ed, they interviewed countless teachers, countless administrators, parents from all of the elementary schools, as well as the middle school and as well as the high school. And probably their highlight of the visit was certainly interviewing all of our students, where the students were in the room with them by themselves and really answering their questions honestly and truthfully. And I think you'll see some of those student quotes as you read through the report over the weekend. In addition to all of those interviews, they had the opportunity to visit all 5 schools. They had the opportunity to visit classrooms and observe some of our EI lessons that were ongoing. They also had the opportunity to observe some of our response to intervention, some of our stress less groups that were taking place. And they had an opportunity to sit here in the Wagner Room. We developed a website for them that collected all of our evidence that we've really been working on for many years now, beginning way back when with our SAPL framework, our social academic personal learning framework, to our TEPL document, our teacher evaluation professional learning document, as well as the countless professional development that we've done for our staff, for our parents, and for our community. And so with all of that, they come back on Friday. We have a fishbowl. They ask their final questions of us, and then they head off and they write their report. And then they send the report to Brian and I, and we had an opportunity to sit with them, go through the report. Last week, we had an opportunity to share the report with the administrators and go through it and have them talk about some of the celebrations and to talk about some of what they see as next steps. And this evening, we're here to share this report with all of you. And I'm going to turn it over to Susan now, who's going to go through some of the highlights from the report and to talk about next steps. And then we'll answer any questions that you have. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Parenti. I just have to start by lots of thank yous, mostly to Dr. Parenti, who really organized that entire visit with such detail, organizational skill, and vision, because it really is quite something to have 17 people come into your district and spend 3 days. So thank you so much, and thank you to the board, to Dr. Lutzy, to Bill Pesber, just for your ongoing support of this work. It's really, we couldn't do it without the teams, the tri-state teams, the EI teams, the teachers who are amazing, the counselors who are amazing. So everything you're going to hear tonight is really the culmination of all of that incredible work that's taken place here in the district. So I do have the pleasure of kind of doing a summary, I guess, of all of the responses we had to our essential question. So some of the wonderful things they said, I love these words, that we designed and delivered a coherent, consistent, and well-integrated model for well-being. So the team did feel that we had a systemic approach to this, that we really started with that SAPL framework from 10 years ago, as Jill said, that really guides all of our work. The TEPL framework, which again helps us to evaluate and have it be part of our ongoing work with teachers. And I think our shared vision and goals, which has really been so essential for us, is that everybody really believes in this work. And there was one quote in the report I loved, which was, "It's not what we do, it's who we are." And I think that was well captured in the report. All members of the school community contribute to the process, and that was really important to us from the beginning. It's part of the ruler approach that we have TAs who were trained, we had nurses who were trained, we had secretaries involved in building charters with us. It was really important that we involved everybody. And so I think that's been part of the success that we have seen, is really making sure all members are a part of that, and especially the students themselves. And this is an area we can continue to work and grow, but we have spent more and more time really listening to students and getting their feedback on how the work is going and what we can be doing better, and having them lead it. And that's sort of the next step, I think. We'll talk more about that. Ongoing communication has been essential, whether it was PTC presentations, speakers that we brought in, Mark Brackett, Stuart Ablon, communication in terms of internal communication, newsletters, EI newsletters, websites. We've done a lot to try to make sure that everybody knew how important this was, that it's a priority for us as a district. Every component of the model has been refined over the years, is another thing that they said. And again, ongoing communication with stakeholders. And by stakeholders, I think, not only the parents who've been essential, and I just shout out to all the PTC members who've done an incredible job. I don't know if I mentioned last time, but the best example is an Instagram competition they had of do your own at-home charter and send in your picture and win a prize. So they're getting really innovative. They're really partners in this work with us, and I love seeing that. And the other stakeholders, including the library, New Canaan Urgent Assessment, Silver Hill, working with New Canaan Cares, all of these pieces have really helped us in the work moving forward. And finally, they said that New Canaan has progressed to a mature stage of development, and that we're really at the point where we're exploring innovation and increasing our effectiveness through innovation. And that's been really fun to watch. I think one of the best things about going through the website for me as I was organizing was seeing things that I didn't come up with, I had nothing to do with, and teachers were being creative and innovative and coming up with really incredible ways of reaching kids and celebrating the work of well-being. So that's exciting. As Jill mentioned, we really asked them to look at professional learning supervision and evaluation as our indicator. We knew that we had spent a lot of time and real strategic thinking, I think, went into our professional development in this initiative. And they responded by saying, by including multiple employee groups and integrating professional learning, supervision, and evaluation, the district has established a powerful infrastructure for sustaining and advancing its programs for well-being. So again, I think that integration of our TEPL document, which actually has specific indicators around professional growth for our teachers, it has specific indicators around well-being, really, in our SAPL. And it looks at things like how the teacher is developing that learning environment, how the teacher is explicitly teaching social skills to kids. So I think the integration of really being thoughtful about the rollout and then having ways that we could continue that work in conversations between administrators and teachers is just ongoing work and has helped us enormously. So next level of learning, of course, we're constantly trying to improve, and the team had many suggestions for us, fantastic suggestions. One of them was, instead of profile of a graduate, to focus on the terminology profile of a learner as a way to strengthen the relevance to all schools as we begin that work, to really think about what is it that we want to see in our kids from New Canaan Public Schools. Who do we want them to be, and what do we want them to know? And I think that work is going to be really important to have the well-being component be a part of that. And I think the term learner is really important instead of graduate, right? So it's really about all students and not just as they graduate. They also recommended that we gather feedback about the impact of the school's start times, and that, of course, was a really powerful example of our focus on well-being and how we really integrate it into our policies and procedures, to the point of, years of work. And talk about feedback from stakeholders, right? We really worked hard at that. So it does seem like good timing right now that we've been through this for a year, to start to look at that feedback and how it's impacted our kids and parents and families. Also, to continue to involve parents as active participants. This has been really an important piece that we've worked hard at, and I think we're continuing to do that. We're sort of learning that just a presentation to parents, with very busy parents, they don't always show up, right? So we're looking at innovative ways, as I said, to use Instagram, to use the PTC newsletters, to have just little bite-sized pieces that help, tips for parents to use at home. And so we hope to continue that work as a part of our ongoing next steps. We're also working on conducting focus groups. That was part of our school climate survey and work that we always do, and they liked that and wanted us to continue to do that, to make sure that all students are feeling a sense of connectedness, belonging, and well-being, and to hear from different subgroups about their particular issues. So we've done several of those this year and continued to do that, and I think that was an important recommendation as well. They recommended that we continue to differentiate professional learning opportunities to really reflect individual needs and really group needs. So it might be that our ELA department has specific needs about well-being versus our world language, and how can we begin to get feedback from different departments, from different grade levels. Elementary is different from high school, and we're constantly, of course, doing that. We do have a PL committee that's teacher-run, and they give us feedback, but I think continuing that important work will be important. And excuse me, finally, to continue to build on the well-being initiatives, they had a couple of recommendations specifically about that, and I thought they were excellent. We've all been talking a lot about digital wellness. You had a presentation about that, I think, last board meeting, and that's an area that we know is an ongoing concern for parents, for all of us with our kids, to just make sure they have balance and wellness related to their use of social media. We did just have a presentation at Sachs Middle School last week about that, which was well attended and I think really helpful in terms of helping parents to understand social media and some of the ways that they can use those privacy settings and limits to help kids navigate this really difficult and challenging time. So we will continue that work. We have a district committee on digital wellness, continue the work around digital citizenship and lessons that we explicitly teach to kids. And also civil discourse was another recommendation, and I think that's important and part of what we're always teaching in EI. How do we talk to each other in ways that we can really increase understanding and decrease conflict, and how do we make that effective for all of us, definitely for our kids. So those were some of our next level learning. Excellent recommendations, I think. There were a few others that sprinkled in there. I think we covered most. The other one I think I mentioned before is just student voice, and we do hope to continue that work that we're doing and really get more and more feedback from our kids about what is working, what works for them. So that will be important as well. So one of the questions that our teachers asked the Tri-State Committee was, how can we do better? This is our New Canaan teachers, right? Always, how can we do better? What are the best practices around this work? What are other districts doing? And what was really powerful was that the Tri-State Committee wrote, we applaud their, meaning the teachers' interest in continuous improvement based on exemplary work. And our advice is, if you want to learn from the best, look in the mirror. So that made all of us smile and feel very good about, the countless hours that we have put into this work. But again, it's a success of really a culture of caring that has been created from the very top, and the commitment that everybody shares, the board, the teachers, the administration, that this work is important and that we know our kids have to feel good in order to achieve, and that we will not stop until we continue to do this work and do it better every single day. So thank you to all of you again for your support, and Dr. Prenti and I are here for answer any questions.
Thank you. And I just want to say congratulations to you and to the entire faculty and staff and everybody that was involved on obviously a job very well done. So thank you. Questions? Erica?
In the suggestions that they made a few around engaging parents. So specifically, you had run like a space supportive parenting for anxious childhood emotions session for parents.
Yes.
And then it also talks about some of the student programs around peer mentoring, connections, and workshops on stress. And I'm just wondering, for some of those suggestions, are there barriers to doing them more, across and really reaching more parents and more students with these programs? Is that work that we can move forward with, or are there things that we might need to address in order to get there?
I don't think so. I think we already are doing some of those things. I think what was exciting is the space program for parents. This was the first year that we initiated that, and we were able to send one of our social workers for training in the model, which is evidence-based and out of Yale. And I actually worked with her with some parents, which was really fun for me because I got to work with parents directly. We had a great response. I think when we she sent out a letter to parents seeing if they were interested, and we thought we might get 5, and there were 20 who responded, which speaks to some of those needs. So there was a wait list, and she is now rerunning the group so that we could fit everybody in. So really the only barrier was time and trying to make that happen, and we are planning to expand that. We have a middle school social worker who's now co-running the group. I stepped out. She's in so that she can now bring it up to our middle school, because we know that anxiety is something our kids face, and we want to help our parents to support them. So that's a great example. The peer mentorship, again, great innovation. It came from one of our teachers, that peer mentorship. I mean, we've had peer mentorship, but there's a new program just focused on our freshmen, and very exciting. We got some good feedback just today from the kids about it and how effective it's been. Have those relationships where the older seniors are going into our connections classes and sitting with freshmen and answering questions and supporting them. So those are good examples of innovative new practices. But right now, I don't see barriers, but I'll let you know. Sure.
I just want to congratulate you on this amazing report. I mean, you all started this program about 10 years ago, and I remember there was some trepidation in the community about what we were going to do and if we were overstepping our bounds. I think the way you've involved all the different interest groups and educated everybody has just been a model and a great way to go. And so thank you very much for all that effort. All of our students are going to benefit from it. I look forward to hearing about the next levels. And then just because I'm always interested, I was wondering if there's a timeline for gathering the feedback and reporting back to the board on the impact of school start time.
Not yet.
It was
That's
sitting right there
a great
in front of me as a tickler. Right.
I knew it was coming around. The goal is to, excuse me, the goal is to share that feedback with the board by, if not by the end of the school year, in the summertime, because we want to capture this cohort of kids. We had some plans, it slowed down a little bit, but we'll be ready to go very soon. Yes. So that is the plan.
Terrific, thanks.
Yes, you're welcome. Excuse me. Well, while my mic's on, let me just very quickly say, again, thank you and congratulations. The committee of 17 to a person, not only were they incredibly impressed by the work we've been doing in the district and what excuse me, what they saw in the evidence that were presented, they were equally impressed by the very well-developed, thought-out schedule and organization and management of the visit. You know, if these visits aren't managed well, the visitors don't have the opportunity to have the experiences that they can actually learn from and write about and give us feedback. And to a person, not only were they impressed by the district, but they shared that it was the best managed, organized, conceptualized visit that they'd been on. And that is credit to Dr. Bliss for sure, but first and foremost to Dr. Krantz and the outstanding work that she did putting together the team.
Committee.
And I know it's a committee, I know, but committees have leaders. And, you know, they come for 3 days, but we prepare for the visit for 6 months. And they're coming to look at work that's been ongoing for 6+ years. So it really is, it culminates in that, but then the work continues. And I think they were able to get an incredibly accurate view of what we're doing, and their feedback is both confirming of the work we're doing, inspiring in the feedback that they provided, and helpful as we think about next steps and what we're going to be doing in the future.
I have a question. I know there was in a lot of the comments, they talked about how well integrated our approach is and how deeply embedded it is in all areas of learning. I'm just wondering, did they expand on that at all, or in conversations that you had with them, with respect to how it's impacted student learning and you know, the academic portions of the day? Because that is where it's embedded. I'm just wondering in terms of how well we've done that, or if there are things to highlight, or any lessons to take away in terms of how we've implemented that over the years.
I think some of the things I remember the team talking about was just using like the 5-finger breathing when kids needed to calm down coming back from lunch and start to get ready to learn, and using those strategies that the kids themselves were able to speak to the fact that those strategies were helpful to them both in school and out of school, you know, on the softball field, but also before a math test and that. So there were some specific examples. I think the embeddedness came across in the fact that, like, we have PE teachers who are passionate about this and, you know, really use it when they're talking about teamwork, for example, such a natural fit, right? How do you work with others? How do you take perspective? So whether it was, you know, learning emotion words in Spanish, or the PE teacher helping with teamwork, or a math teacher just helping to prepare when they're very anxious about the test so they can do their best. I think the embeddedness.
I think they also picked up where certainly when you're reading books and you're talking about different characters' perspectives and how that is really blueprint and being able to take multiple perspectives. So you may not be actually teaching the blueprint, but you're talking about multiple perspectives, and then it's nice to weave it in so that when you do go to a lesson on the blueprint, you're talking about those characters and what that meant, what they went through, how they had to look at different perspectives and understand different perspectives, and how that character might have been feeling, or how that character might have been feeling. And then they are integrating it into their own lives. And so that was probably one of the best ways that we can reach some of our older students. You know, certainly at the elementary level, it's a lot easier to help teach those 5-finger rules and to have the whole class do a strategy together to get them into the green so that they're ready to do their math lesson. And it's a little bit more difficult when you're working with 8th graders.
Yeah, I know.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments, questions? All right, thank you. Great, moving on to our action items. First, I guess I'll ask for a motion to approve a donation of $50,918.54 from the New Canaan All Sport Booster Club to support 2023 spring coaching positions. Hugo, second. Penny? Any,
I'll just briefly share, and you have it in front of you, and it was shared earlier. And similarly, for the other donation that we'll be talking about momentarily, as you know, the All Sports Booster Club donates each season to help to increase the number of coaches that we have working with our student athletes, recognizing that the athlete coach ratio, reducing that increases the quality of the instruction, provides for a more successful experience for our students, and leads to a more positive experience overall for all of our student athletes. So great thank you to the All Sports Booster Club for their ongoing generosity. It really, and because the number $51,000 in the spring, another 41, 42 for the winter, you can see the variety of coaching positions that they support, and it is balanced across the sports and boys sports and girls sports as well. And all of this is done in collaboration with Jay Egan, our athletic director, who works with them to identify the needs and the opportunities that are there.
comments? Questions? I'll just say it's incredible. I mean, it really does increase access to sports for so many students, and it's a very powerful contribution in terms of the impact that it has on participation and the number of kids who are able to be part of our outstanding athletic programs. All right, all in favor? Okay, unanimous. And then ask for another motion to approve a donation of $41,556.20 from the New Canaan All Sport Booster Club to support 2023 winter coaching positions. Bill, second. Brendan, all in favor? Unanimous. Thank you. Finally, I'll ask if there's any comments from the public. Seeing none, we'll move on to announcements and future business.
Sure. Briefly, at our next meeting, we've invited in our guidance department from the high school here. We'll be talking about the work that they do around college placement and the developmental guidance program 9 through 12. It'll be a good time for an update on the move to 220. Things continue to move quickly over there, and we are continuing our preparations for that. And we'll have a statement of accounts as well, it being the second meeting of the month. And just as a very brief announcement, Sarah's here, so I definitely want to make it. Excuse me. We received news today of a generous donation by the Rotary Club towards the Dome project as well. So there's still opportunities, and folks are still contributing towards that very exciting project. And to publicly, again, thank Sarah for spearheading that for the district and helping to bring this vision to a reality for our kids.
Thank you. And then I was just going to make an announcement, if I may. We have, the Board of Education is looking to fill the vacancy, and as such, we are open to receiving any letters of interest or resumes. Those can be sent to either myself or to Michelle Ahmed, who works in Dr. Letsy's office and supports the board. This week, we would ask that those be submitted by the end of the week, May 12th, as we go through our process and evaluating filling that seat. So thank you to the community for that. Anything else? Okay. So I'll ask for a motion to adjourn to executive session in accordance with Connecticut General Statute 1-225A. The subjects to be discussed are collective bargaining and contract negotiations. Motion. Brendan, second. Hugo, all in favor? Okay, thank you.